All right, guys, welcome to the session of SBL analysis for March-June 2022 exams, and here we will discuss the examiner report. My name is Dishan Hassan, and I've been teaching this strategic business leader exam since the inception of this paper. Right now, let's move on straight away. We will ignore, as per practice, we will ignore the general comments as it mostly contains the structure of the exam. Now, here it is. We're saying that overall the standard of the candidate answers for the March 22 sitting was in line with other sittings. The biggest weakness were lack of depth and explanation in the points candidates made and failing to consider the context of ex marine. So repetitively, I'm saying that mostly all of the examiners are complaining that students writing too brief, right? So and the most competent candidates integrated and use information from case study materials throughout their answers, selecting relevant technical knowledge to support the applied points they were making. They also demonstrated professional skills, blah blah blah. Further, they are saying it was apparent that some candidates had not used and assimilated the guidance and resource produced by ACCA for SBL. So some students not gain the technical knowledge. Another issue. Now, analyzing the exhibits, candidates must spend sufficient time reading and assigning the information within the exhibits which make up the case study materials. Often, answers fail to make sufficient reference to the exhibits or fail to make use of the full range of material in the exhibits. So, not linking answers with the scenario, or we can say exhibits. So far, so good. Further, examiners saying that candidates should read exhibits carefully while keeping the requirements of each task in mind. So, not reading requirements carefully, that's other issue which students failing. That's why students failing, right? Okay, now the exhibits providing the material which underpin the applied points that candidates should be marking, including necessary background information. It's about the exhibits. So further, he's saying that candidates must remember that merely reproducing material from the exhibits without commenting on it or developing further points will not score marks. Remember that, and that's not a single time examiner complaining about it. In various exam settings, the examiner did complain about it. Candidates must also spend sufficient time on planning to ensure that their answers are structured logically, balanced in terms of depth of discussion required with the breadth of points to be made, covering the most important points, not padded out with material that does not address the task requirements, not making the same point two or more times, not overlapping. Further, examiners saying that candidates also need to be aware of how time can be poorly used in this exam. That's the technique of wasting time, by the way. And what are they? Wasting time by including material not relevant to task requirements, writing elaborate and lengthy plans, making the same point twice or more in slightly different ways. Particularly in task 2A in this exam, markers will not give additional marks for points which are repeated or restated, even if they are slightly reworded. Now, what are the reasons of failure? Lack of development of the point made, lack of analysis skills, failure to point the requirements specified, failure to respond to the requirements in professional or commercially sound manner, lack of understanding. what was strategically significant for the company, lack of commercial acumen, poor level of technical knowledge, wasting time, making irrelevant points. Now, it examiner complaining that candidates not reading the task requirement carefully enough, resulting in them not answering the task that had been asked for. Okay, so making irrelevant points cost you 0 marks, right? Now, technical marks, demonstration of technical knowledge or explanation of you know, or explanation of theory does not score marks in the strategic business leader exam to gain each technical mark. So you what you need to do, make points that address the requirement of the task, considering the scope of answer required, what the task verb indicated should be provided, show the marker why the points being made were significant, relevant in the context of expiring, uh, consider issues that were specific to the decision or issue covered in the task. So up to 2 marks were sometimes available. A well-developed appointment, however, candidates are reminded 2 marks will only be awarded when the candidates have successfully identified, explained a relevant point, and developed this point by evaluating how significant the point is, using information provided that relates the point directly to the company, explaining the consequences for the company, supporting the point made with relevant examples. In this setting, candidates often reproduce information taken from the exhibits without explaining why the information was important or made assertions without supporting them with reasons. So, stating that the strategy committee should meet regularly without justifying this statement in terms of the task is needed to carry out regularly, stating that the payback period for luxury yachts was 6 years without this statement in terms of the task that it need to be carried out regularly, stating the payback period for luxury charge was 6 years without explaining why this was significant in the context of risk or the chief executive time horizon, stating the suggested risk mitigation activities were inadequate without giving reasons. So these are the mistakes examiner pointed out that students made in the exam. Identify if it was you or not. What? Now, further saying, many candidates merely copy and pasted information in Exhibit 7 without showing how the service offered would fulfill ex-marine needs. Candidates who presented very generic answer were awarded limited marks because they didn't connect with scenario. Here it is. Faults seen on a number of scripts included overlong paragraphs with aspects of tasks, for example, with the proposal discussed in a single paragraph containing multiple points. This shows poor exam technique, lack of professionalism, not paying attention to the format required. Some candidates continue to produce easy type answers no matter what format was required, not considering who was receiving the document produced. For example, in task 2B, candidates were asked to produce letter addressed to the employee, talking throughout the letter about the employees in the third season rather than trying to communicate directly with them in the language used would not help persuade employees that management care for their interests. Poor tone and comments made, for example, in task 1 when challenging the integrity of the executive directors on the strategy committee in the latter address to the chief executive, one of the directors, failing to demonstrate sound commercial acumen in making suggestions for risk mitigation activities in task 4. Okay. Candidates must read the technical and professional requirements together. All this will assist them in formulating their answers in a correct style, tone, and with the correct level of professionalism. Now, let us look at the specific comments. This was the requirement one, where Yex Marine chief executive is drafting plans to establish number of boats subcommittee to fulfill the business needs of Exmarine as well as meeting corporate governance best practice requirement, blah blah blah. 14 marks where we have to write a letter replying to the chief executive of Exmarine, which assesses his proposal to establish strategy committee and demonstrating skills have had to be shown. So what were the weaknesses in that area? Failing to identify the finance director as missing from the committee membership. This was surprising, given the need for the committee to discuss investment proposal with considerable financial implications, as shown in exhibit. Not identifying the lack of human resources expertise on the committee, the current problems with employees relations, and the operational need for experienced staff indicated the need to consider the human resource implications, failing to consider possible organizational complexities, particularly unclear split of responsibilities between the board and strategic committee, and how the corporate strategy discussed by the committee were linked to operational strategies, not considering the implications of listing. For example, need to give confidence to investors that strategy was being developed within a coherent framework, stating as benefits information had just been cut and pasted from Exhibit 3, talking about current shareholders as if they are external shareholders. All the shares were currently owned by the executive directors, writing about the pros and cons of strategies rather than strategic committee. Whereas the requirement to prepare the briefing notes for the board which advise for how employee dissatisfaction may impact each of the organizational process, uh, demonstrate, demonstrating skills were also available for this requirement. Now see what students did. Candidates did use a change model. This means that they, although identified relevant staff concerns, they struggled to come up with specific impacts these concerns could have on the change process. The impacts stated were often repeated, vaguely expressed, or related to the business operations generally rather than the change process. Okay, leave-in models describe its stages but fail to apply ex-marine circumstances, the issues raised by the employees. Some answers also spend time discussing what could be done to deal with the employees' concerns. This shows the importance of being aware the task requirements contain. Okay, now next requirement was letter to send by the chief executive to all employees and explaining to them the steps which will be taken to address concerns which they have about the proposed changes. 8 marks and demonstrating skills were available here as well. Now, what were the weaknesses over here? Suggesting vague actions rather than specific steps that address employee concerns, spending too much time on the flooding issue. Only a few employees had raised this, and it was not relevant to changes in organization and working practices. Listing in detail the benefits to Marine often at the start of the letter, which suggested they were really matter to the board. Writing a letter to chief executive from the consultant rather than from the chief executive to staff. Wow. Okay. Further, examiner encouraged some candidate as well as they talk about the employees in third person rather than addressing them directly. Adopted a defensive tone about the changes, focus on the benefits to Marine of the changes rather than employee concerns. Failed to address important concerns of employees. Now, uh, third part in- includes advice on the financial and non-financial benefits and the drawbacks of the investment projects. Okay, recommend with reasons which should be chosen. So professional skills available for demonstrating evaluation skills. 4 marks. Well, this task was crucial in demonstrating whether candidates passed or failed the exam. Well, this was so crucial, you see. And students who followed the approach indicated in the task requirement of discussing each option separately, splitting their answers between benefits and drawbacks, splitting the benefits and drawbacks into financial, non-financial, were often able to generate plenty of ideas. The requirements did not specify a direct comparison. Okay. Uh, some comparisons added no value were not appropriate. Comparison of the NPV failed. Profit margin was stated to be high or low without a meaningful comparison. Payback for luxury yacht was stated to be high at 6 years without explaining that this was a potential indicator. So see what were the mistakes they made. They need to demonstrate innovation employees by utilizing their craftsmanship skills, demanding being less vulnerable to fashion changes, dinging being in a potential long-term steady earner. Uh, okay, low starting prices, customers trading up to cruising yachts in time. In task 4, where they have to evaluate the assessment made of each risk and the potential impacts, evaluate the adequacy of the risk mitigating activities and recommending further mitigating activities. Regular sort of a requirement, though surprising number of candidates fail to suggest that Xmarin should take some precaution itself. A contingency plan was certainly required. Answers on the product obsolescence risk were weaker as many candidates did not grasp that product obsolescence mean here failing behind market taste. Few candidates acquired the assessment of risk serious, which was questionable in the short term given the nature of Marine products. Many candidates failed to criticize the labeling of risk as serious or non-serious and suggested their stating their likelihood and impact would have been better. Lastly, we had to prepare the briefing notes for the which assess the potential benefits using the service offered by the adversity agency. 12 marks were available, and professional skills of commercial acumen had to be used over there. And students weaker failing to were failing to consider the general provision of services by advertising agency acting in the short term insist of the marketing director. Marine did not currently have or outsourcing marketing activities to it use of its six eyes framework. So that's why these were the common mistakes which made by the students and caused them a failure in this exam. So if you guys have any question to me, you can ask in the comments of this video. Also, you can contact me on the WhatsApp 923341777706 WhatsApp. All right. I hope to see you soon. Also, do subscribe and follow this channel for the future updates. Take care and bye bye.